December 17th, 1944. Elsenborn Ridge, Belgium. In the frozen pre-dawn darkness, SS Obersturmbannführer Max Hansen stood among his men, watching the final preparations for what should have been a decisive breakthrough. He was no ordinary officer, a veteran of Kharkov, Normandy, and the brutal retreats of the Eastern Front. Hansen commanded the 1st SS Panzer Grenadier Regiment of the Leibstandard SS Adolf Hitler, Hitler's personal bodyguard division. These were Germany's best remaining troops, hardened, fanatical, and experienced. Directly ahead lay Elsenborn Ridge, held by the U.S. 99th Infantry Division, nicknamed the Battle Babies because most had never seen combat. On paper, the odds favored Hansen overwhelmingly. His Kampfgruppe numbered over 2,000 men, supported by artillery, anti-tank guns, and armored half-tracks. German doctrine was clear. Elite infantry, properly led, could infiltrate and rupture even prepared defenses through disciplined small unit tactics. Hansen had done this before, against Soviets, British, Canadians. He reviewed the intelligence one last time. American positions were thinly held. Trenches were shallow. Coordination was untested. His orders were explicit. Break through. Seize the ridge. Open the road to Liège and Antwerp. The entire northern shoulder of the Ardennes offensive depended on his success. At 5:30 a.m., he gave the order, Vorwärts. The initial artillery barrage shook the frozen earth. Hundreds of shells pounded the twin villages of Rokeroth and Krinkelt. Hansen's grenadiers advanced in classic infiltration pattern. Small teams dispersed through the snow-laden forest, probing for weak points. Early reports were promising. Forward American outposts had been overrun. Enemy troops were falling back. Then the American artillery responded. Hansen expected counter-battery fire. He had endured Soviet barrages that lasted for hours. But this was different. The first shells exploded exactly 20 feet above his men. Then another volley. Then another. Every shell burst at the same optimal height, high enough to clear tree branches, low enough to shower shrapnel over a wide area. Foxholes offered no protection. Trenches became death traps. A company commander radioed in, voice urgent. Herr Obersturmbannführer, the American shells are detonating above our positions. Our men have no cover. Casualties are severe. Hansen frowned. Airbursts required precise timing fuses. Getting the altitude right demanded exact calculations, real-time weather data, and flawless gunnery. Doing it consistently, shell after shell, was nearly impossible. Yet, the Americans were achieving it with machine-like regularity. He ordered the attack to continue. Over the next 6 hours, Hansen watched his carefully orchestrated assault disintegrate. Each time his men massed for an advance, American artillery responded within minutes, shells bursting with surgical precision overhead. Even his veterans, men who had survived Stalingrad, were pinned, shredded, demoralized. By afternoon, he had committed his second wave, then his reserves. The pattern never changed. Frustrated, he called artillery command. "Can you suppress the American guns?" The reply was grim. "We're trying, Herr Obersturmbannführer, but we cannot locate their firing positions quickly enough. Their counter-battery fire is extraordinarily accurate." This defied experience. On the Eastern Front, artillery duels were chaotic. Guns fired, displaced, fired again. But the Americans weren't displacing. They were firing continuously from fixed positions with impossible accuracy. It was as if they could see exactly where his troops were and calculate the perfect burst height instantly. On the evening of December 18th, a patrol brought Hansen something unusual. An unexploded American 105mm artillery shell recovered from a crater near Krinkelt. He unscrewed the nose cone and examined the fuse. What he saw made no sense. Instead of a simple mechanical timer, the fuse contained miniature vacuum tubes, a battery, an antenna, and intricate circuitry. What appeared to be a miniature radio transceiver. He summoned his signals officer, a former Telefunken engineer. "What is this?" The officer studied it, face paling. "This is a VT proximity fuse. It emits radio waves. When the shell nears the ground, reflected waves trigger detonation at the optimal altitude. The shell decides when to explode automatically." "Can we build this?" The engineer shook his head. "The miniaturization alone is beyond our capabilities. These vacuum tubes are smaller than anything in German production, and they survive being fired from a gun barrel, which means they withstand forces of 20,000 times gravity. Sir, this represents a level of engineering precision we cannot match." Hansen sat alone in his command post as darkness fell. His attack had failed. Over 800 of his men were casualties. The ridge remained in American hands. But it wasn't the tactical defeat that haunted him. It was the mathematics. He pulled out his notebook and began to calculate. Each proximity fuse contained approximately 30 precision components. 4 miniature vacuum tubes, 15 resistors, 10 capacitors, a battery assembly, and an antenna mechanism, all required skilled labor, clean room assembly, and rigorous quality control. American artillery had fired roughly 3,000 shells at his sector alone. If just 20% used proximity fuses, that meant 600 smart shells in one day at one location, and Elsenborn was only one sector of the Ardennes front. Similar barrages were falling on St. Vith, Bastogne, and Monschau. He consulted intelligence files. The U.S. Army had 200 artillery battalions in Europe. If half used proximity fuses, and each fired 100 rounds per day, that was 10,000 fuses consumed daily, just in Europe. The Pacific Theater added more. Now he considered Germany's capacity. He had visited Ruhr factories before the offensive, production lines running on reduced schedules, coal shortages, forced laborers operating poorly maintained machines. Germany's entire electronics industry employed perhaps 50,000 skilled workers, responsible for radios, radar, fire control systems, and communications. If one technician could assemble one fuse in 8 hours, producing 10,000 daily would require 10,000 full-time specialists, a workforce Germany simply did not have. He recalled an intelligence report he had dismissed weeks earlier as propaganda. Ford converting auto plants to aircraft production, General Motors building tank engines, Chrysler manufacturing M4 Shermans. The report claimed American factories had been retooled in months to produce military equipment at scales exceeding Germany's entire industrial output. Holding the fuse, Hansen realized those reports were underestimates. The proximity fuse itself was impressive engineering, but what truly terrified him was what it represented: an industrial system capable of mass-producing complex electronics during total war. He compared production figures. In 1944, Germany produced approximately 40,000 aircraft, 25,000 armored vehicles, 500 million artillery fuses, mostly simple mechanical types. The United States produced 96,000 aircraft, over 29,000 tanks, 15 million proximity fuses, plus hundreds of millions of conventional fuses. The ratio wasn't 2-to-1 or 3-to-1. In key categories, it was 5-to-1, 10-to-1, or higher, and American production was still increasing, while Germany's was declining under bombing, material shortages, and workforce collapse. Hansen closed his notebook. The conclusion was irrefutable. Germany was fighting an industrial war against an enemy with 5 to 10 times the production capacity. No amount of tactical brilliance, soldierly courage, or ideological fervor could overcome that disparity. The war was already lost, not because of this battle, but because Germany's entire strategic foundation was built on a lie: that will could overcome material, that quality could defeat quantity, that German superiority was destiny. The proximity fuse was mathematical proof, written in steel, copper, and vacuum tubes, that the lie was false. That night, Hansen wrote his after-action report. He described the tactical situation, casualty figures, and American defensive strength. Then he added a paragraph he knew would be unwelcome. The enemy has deployed a proximity fuse that detonates artillery shells at optimal altitude without requiring timing calculations. This weapon renders traditional infantry tactics obsolete. Foxholes and trenches no longer provide protection. Based on examination of a captured specimen, this device represents industrial and technical capabilities significantly exceeding current German production capacity. Recommendation: strategic reassessment required. He sealed the report and handed it to his orderly. It would travel up the chain to division, corps, army, where it would be read, noted, and ignored, because the truth it contained was too terrible to acknowledge. Germany wasn't losing due to poor tactics or weak soldiers. It was losing because it was outproduced, out-engineered, and out-systematized by an industrial democracy operating at a scale the Third Reich could not comprehend. Over the next 3 days, attacks on Elsenborn Ridge continued. The 12th SS Panzer Division joined the assault. Elite troops, teenage fanatics, hardened NCOs, all met the same fate. American artillery fired over 10,000 rounds per day. A significant portion used VT fuses, each burst with perfect precision. German soldiers learned the old rules no longer applied. Digging in didn't help. Dispersing didn't help. Speed didn't help. The shells found them. On December 20th, German High Command finally accepted reality. Elsenborn Ridge could not be taken. The northern shoulder of the offensive had failed. Hansen's regiment was pulled back to refit. Of the 2,000 men who attacked on December 17th, fewer than 1,200 remained. A 40% casualty rate in less than a week, inflicted by an inexperienced American division. After the war, declassified data confirmed Hansen's fears. By late 1944, American factories were producing 40,000 proximity fuses per day. Total wartime production exceeded 22 million units, 22 million miniature radar sets, each more complex than most German field radios, all manufactured in under 2 years. For comparison, Germany's total production of all fuse types for the entire war was roughly 500 million, almost all simple mechanical or timed devices. The Americans had produced 22 million smart fuses, while also churning out hundreds of millions of conventional ones. At Elsenborn alone, American artillery fired over 30,000 shells in 3 days. Conservative estimates suggest 6,000 to 9,000 used proximity fuses. And Elsenborn was just one battle. Hansen survived the war. In 1945, he was interrogated by U.S. technical intelligence officers. "Did you understand what you were facing?" they asked. He nodded slowly. "Not because of cowardice or poor leadership, but because we were fighting an industrial system operating at a scale we couldn't comprehend." Why did the attacks continue? Because acknowledging the truth would mean admitting the entire ideology was built on lies. German superiority, the triumph of will, victory through determination, all lies. The proximity fuse proved that mathematics matters more than mythology. But mythology was all we had left. The American officer closed his notebook. For what it's worth, we found your report in captured archives. It was marked, filed, no action required. Hansen smiled bitterly. Of course it was. His story is a microcosm of Germany's defeat. Time and again, competent professionals, Admiral Canaris, Albert Speer, field commanders, warned of American industrial superiority. All were ignored because the Nazi regime valued ideology over evidence. It believed will could overcome mathematics, racial myth could defeat material reality, and fanaticism could substitute for production. It was wrong. At Elsenborn Ridge, young German soldiers died in foxholes that no longer protected them, killed by weapons they couldn't understand, produced by factories they couldn't imagine, in a war already lost. The proximity fuse didn't just kill men. It killed the illusion that Germany could win. It was mathematical proof that the industrial war was over, and no amount of sacrifice could change that equation. The shells kept falling. The mathematics kept calculating, and the Reich kept dying, blind to a reality it refused to see. In the end, reality doesn't care what you believe. The smart shells at Elsenborn Ridge proved that beyond any doubt. The Battle of Elsenborn Ridge is remembered not for dramatic breakthroughs, but for quiet resilience, and for the moment when industrial might rendered even elite fanaticism obsolete. If you value history that honors both the courage of soldiers and the unseen systems that determine victory, if you believe truth matters more than myth, we invite you to subscribe. This channel is dedicated to preserving the real legacy of World War II, not as spectacle, but as lesson, because those who fought deserve more than legend. They deserve understanding.